Chapter 79 Kimberly What did it mean to not resist the trap? Everyone is a suspect? I knew what Riley meant when he said it. He meant we shouldn't stay in groups because if you're with someone, neither of you can be suspects because you can vouch for each other, and then Carousel would have to do something to split you up. But how were we actually supposed to do that? Was I seriously supposed to wander off on my own, knowing full well there were werewolves in the forest? At least in Ranger danger, we were just clueless college kids who wouldn't have realized something bad was about to happen. But in this story, we were supposed to be seasoned werewolf hunters. How could we ever get so separated that there would be no witnesses to our innocence? It turned out to be easier than I had thought. We trickled out of the mini-library one or two at a time because it would look more natural that way. As we walked back toward the stone walls of the fort, I saw Hetty Morgan, the silversmith, heading our way. She was carrying a large, heavy bag and clearly struggling with it. On screen. "Miss," she called out. "Miss Kimberly, could you please help me with this?" I didn't hesitate. I jumped forward and grabbed one of the bag's handles to help her out. "I just need help getting it to my cabin on the other side of the valley. It's a 10-minute walk, no more." "I'd be glad to help," Antoine offered, always eager to lend a hand. "We ladies have it," Hetty said, waving him off. "Now go back over there with your guns and your army men, young fella." Hetty really didn't like the mercenaries. And just like that, I was separated from the group. It was nearly dark, the moon already up and hidden behind some clouds, almost full. Hetty and I walked one way, and the rest of the team stayed back at the fort. As we walked, Hetty stared straight ahead, focused and quiet. If we hadn't been on screen, I'd have expected her to stay like that. Maybe I was supposed to fill the silence, so I started to form a question about Clara Withers and the werewolf curse. But before I could say anything, Hetty spoke first. "You got something weighing on you, girl?" she asked. No, she wasn't asking, she was telling me. "A lot of things, actually," I admitted. "I heard what Mr. Curse did to you folks. I feel awful sorry about it. If I'd known that was what he was up to, I would never have helped him," she said. Carousel wanted us to react to the betrayal. Getting injected with werewolf saliva should have been a traumatic moment, but we all just sort of shrugged it off. Maybe we took it a little too well. "You get into this business. You expect to get bitten one day," I said. "Werewolf hunters don't live long." I took my free hand and brushed my hair out of my eyes, aiming for something dramatic. My hair blew just right in the breeze. I tried to put on a brave face, but at the same time, I had to act worried, preoccupied. "Sometimes they live forever," Hetty said, cracking a sly smile I could barely see in the dim light. "They get bit." I laughed softly. "I guess that's true," I said. "Maybe if I do end up a werewolf, at least I'll get answers." "I knew you were a woman with questions," Hetty said. "You ain't the first woman with questions to come to Witherhold Manor." I stopped working, gripping the bag tightly. Hetty kept going a few steps before she realized I wasn't moving. "Did they look like me?" I asked. Hetty turned back, giving me a curious smile. "There's a painting of a young woman in the house," I said. "She looks a lot like me. And I'm starting to think the reason I'm alive is because somehow all of this involves me. Do you know anything?" Hetty laughed, the sound soft but knowing. "I only know the story," she said. "Come on, we gotta get in before dark." Antoine and Riley had been worried about digging too deeply into the lore of this story. Antoine's rescue trap might not reward the search for deeper truths, and the risk of uncovering secret lore that could derail the storyline was too big. But if Carousel was offering me a lead, I wasn't going to let it slip away. Riley Andrew was going to stay in the stacks. I pushed the bookcase closed as I left him there. He said he was going to stay up researching. "Remember to keep an eye on your statuses," I said. "Being locked in a room with all these candles can't be too healthy on your oxygen intake. It was also a fire hazard." "Yes, but as long as I survive until rebirth, I'll be fine because this room will become a sanctuary, and I won't be able to die here," he said. That was technically true. Maybe he just didn't want to walk all the way to the fort to find a gas lantern. Heck, they might have even had electric. Flashlight tech was pretty advanced in 1986, right? In the storyline, it almost felt like we were pre-electric. I was headed down into the tunnels underneath the manor. I had wrangled up a cot and a sleeping bag, and I was going to find the furthest room from the cages filled with werewolves that I could find, close myself in, and spend the night. I would occupy myself by digging into the walls, searching for silver or anything else that might be hidden there. I had it all pictured out. I was going to use my large silver spoon to budge the stone out of its mortar while whispering to myself, "What were you hiding down here?" in hopes that Carousel would hear me and decide to give me a gift or a lead. I had noticed something odd about the property. There was no graveyard. Nowhere to bury the dead. Witherhold Manor, as it was now called, was a picturesque location for a spooky cemetery, so the fact that there wasn't one was quite strange. So where did they put the dead people? The catacombs underneath the manor were my obvious pick. So, when we all decided where we were going to stay during First Blood, that was my choice. I had asked about the young woman, Clara Withers. I had researched her, and now I was following a lead, or maybe a hunch, and Carousel didn't seem to be getting in my way. I felt like if I could just dig in and get a handhold on this historical subplot, I could help Kimberly make a nice proper story for her character. There may have been secret lore involved in this story, but a lot of it was just good old-fashioned lore that we were supposed to uncover for the audience. As I was carrying my supplies into the manor to bring down to the basement level, I heard a helicopter in the sky. Egan Kirst was leaving for the night. That was good news and bad news. The bad news was that he wasn't going to get killed as a scripted First Blood, which could have been very useful to us. Extending Lila's bad luck magnet would have been great. The good news was that we could take him out of the equation for a while. Now, all I had to do was make my way down into the catacombs, past the caged werewolves, and into the safety of the tunnels beyond, searching for dead bodies. I brought my camera with me, the one that was in the back of my car. The lighting wasn't good enough to really use it down in the tunnels, but it was a great prop and allowed me to talk out loud without sounding like a crazy person. I had a full night ahead of me. If I found nothing, that would be okay. If I found the resting place of a tragic young woman, well, at least Kimberly would be happy. That place would likely have to have some clues about the origin of the werewolf curse. Michael I took watch again. Sleeping during the day worked fine for me, especially now that I'd botched my subplot. I should have known better. I had never seen a subplot disappear that fast. I was supposed to go find my grandmother's house and hear her stories about werewolves and Witherhold Manor. I waited too long, figuring I had time until rebirth to make the trip. I was wrong. Now, I couldn't even tell Andrew. Couldn't look him in the eye. 1 minute, I had a clear map in my head, pinpointing her house out in the woods. The next, when I chose to head to the abandoned summer camp instead, it vanished. Just gone. I let it go too long. That part of the story was erased. Now, there's just a blank spot where the answers used to be. What stories would she have told? How to kill werewolves? The truth about Witherhold Manor? Guess I'll never know. Researching wasn't my strong suit anyway. I got my levels in combat, fighting monsters, not learning about them. Sometimes bare knuckle, if it came to it. That's how this would play out too. I'd take down a wolf, put on a show, make it count. People would say I did well, maybe even saved the day. It'd make up for the rest. Riley and Andrew had the library. They didn't need some old family story. Tonight, the wolves would come out, and I was going to get one. Whatever it took, there'd be a body on the ground by morning. A monster, gone. The stone walls had a narrow walkway on top, and my hustle kept me steady as I patrolled. Up there, with the moonlight cutting through the dark, I could see everything. I moved along the maze of walls, quiet as a shadow. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted Lila. Her character didn't bunk at the fort, she stayed in town. Riley had spun a whole scenario for her. She'd leave the fort as the sun dropped, dragging a big, overstuffed bag full of supplies. Sewing needles, provisions, a weapon or two. Whatever seemed plausible, but definitely more than she should carry. The bag would rip. She'd scramble to fix it, picking up her things while the light faded, the dark closed in, and the moon rose. How did Riley know that'd work? No clue. He said it's the kind of thing that works in movies. Said the audience wouldn't care if her character got killed doing something dumb, as long as she wasn't playing a smart character to begin with. Lila was going to play dumb, staying out in the dark to pick up a few knickknacks. She wasn't dumb, though. She was usually pretty smart. That's what burns me up about the whole betrayal. When the werewolf attacked, and it would attack. Thanks to her trop dying last scream, she'd scream, go off screen, and her character would die in the script. But Lila herself? She'd survive. That's when I'd move. I'd find the wolf, track it, and kill it. That was my role. Just doing the job. I kept my eyes on Lila, watching her shuffle on screen and off screen. She hurried when visible and slowed down when not. She was following the plan. And Riley was right. Carousel loved it. The wind shifted, and I knew the monster was coming. I pretended not to notice, but my body was ready. I just had to wait for Lila's scream, then I'd move. After Lila's betrayal, I didn't think I'd ever forgive her. Maybe I still won't. But watching her now, setting herself up like bait to help bring back Logan and Avery, even though she was terrified, it meant something. Even though she wouldn't really die, sitting there defenseless, knowing she'd be attacked, that was the bravest thing anyone could do. Everyone said that Lila ended up as a wallflower instead of a hysteric because she was so afraid of being on screen that she could never be a proper hysteric. I didn't think that was true. I thought Lila couldn't be a hysteric because, even though she doesn't like being watched by the audience, she wasn't afraid of dying. I'd seen her once in the Australish Slayer, tied to a chair, about to lose her soul. On screen, she screamed and begged. Off screen, though, she looked the ghost straight in the eye and said, "You going to pull the lever or not?" That ghost grinned, and so did I. Lila wasn't scared of death. She feared the things she couldn't control, forces that bent life and death for their own amusement. Maybe that was the better thing to fear. The plot cycle ticked forward. The party phase was gone. Somewhere, a small death approached. Tilde. This truck is not in the forest, so I must not be in the forest. This manor is not in the forest, so I must not be in the forest. This fort is not in the forest, so I must not be in the forest. These soldiers are not in the forest, so I must not be in the forest. Kimberly is not in the forest, so I must not be in the forest. Lila is not in the forest, so I must not be in the forest. Lila. Dead. What happened here? I asked. Lila lay on the ground, many gathered around her. Michael held her unmoving body. That didn't make sense. There wasn't supposed to be a body. She was supposed to get the dead status and then be able to walk around off-screen. That was what made her trop so powerful. There was no blood. There were no claw marks. Last night, there had not been a scream. I was on patrol. Where was my gun? I patted myself up and down. My clothes were fine. My gun was missing. The big one I carried. I still had one in my boot and another strapped to my belt, but my big rifle was gone. I had gone into the woods on patrol. I should not have done that. But it was my turn. Everyone was counting on me. I must have zoned out and let the monster in. Now Lila lay there, dead. "Move out of the way," Andrew said as he rushed forward to check on Lila. "Is she a wolf?" the captain asked. "It looks like her wounds have all healed." Andrew examined her body, looking her over up and down. He looked up at me, then over at the captain, and then at Kimberly. "This doesn't make any sense," Andrew said. "She wasn't bitten or scratched, that I can tell, and she certainly hasn't healed. Her clothes are intact." He stuck his fingers near her neck. Was he checking her pulse? "No. Contusions around the neck. It looks like she was strangled," he said. "Strangled? Why would a werewolf strangle someone and not leave another scratch? We all reacted with confusion on screen for a while, and then we went off screen. Michael was there. He said he saw the whole thing. He said the werewolf didn't even try to bite her. It just crushed her throat, and he chased it off. Couldn't get a hit on it. Riley showed up just after that. He had dirt under his fingernails. Dirt all over his skin and clothes. What had he been doing all night? We caught him up to speed. I was listening for a scream, but I never heard one, he said. What happened? He had been using his quiet onset trap to try to listen to First Blood. After we had explained everything, he got this look on his face like he had just figured something out. What is it? I asked. Why would a werewolf strangle someone? He asked. We didn't have an answer, so we waited for him to answer his own question. Because it knew that it couldn't let her scream, he said. At first, I didn't understand what he was getting at, and then I realized. There were suspects, people, who knew they couldn't let her scream. Because if she screamed, they would go off screen and wouldn't be able to attack her anymore. It's what her trap did. The dead status was powerful on a living player. So whoever killed her, whatever killed her, knew about her trap. And who knew about her trap? All of us. Her teammates. We really were all suspects. Huh. Chapter 80 Riley strangled, Hawk said, as if he were talking to himself and not to the rest of us. He had his hat off and was pacing back and forth, working through the information. Don't see that a lot with werewolves, Ant-Man said. I've never seen that with werewolves, in fact. We were on screen, so we had to give our characters' reactions to Lila's demise. It didn't make a lot of sense for a werewolf to strangle a woman. In fact, the only reason I could come up with was completely meta. Someone wanted to stop her from screaming. Because if she screamed, she would get the dead status and couldn't be attacked. That was the power of her trap. I had one similar, cutaway death, but with that trap, I could still be killed because I only got written off. Whatever wolf killed her must have wanted her dead, or at the very least didn't want her to be able to report on what she saw. But that didn't make sense either because there was another witness. Allegedly. Are you sure that it was a werewolf? I asked Michael. What you saw kill her, it was definitely a wolf. How far away were you? Michael had been standing still, his face unmoving as stone. It was a werewolf, he said. I was on the far wall when it happened. The only thing that was out of the ordinary, he started to say, but then he paused. What is it? Hawk asked, moving toward him. The arms, Michael said. The arms were too short. Hawk pointed at Michael as if he had just found his answer. That's it, he said. It wasn't finished with its transformation. So, we're talking about an immature wolf, possibly a brand new one. We all exchanged looks. I had the understanding that immature wolves were the most dangerous and least controllable, Andrew said. A bloodless kill seems out of character. Hawk shook his head. If we are talking about a wolf that hadn't completed its transformation, it was probably still more human than wolf. Which means that when she saw it, she may have recognized who it was. More exchanging looks. We hadn't rehearsed this. It was our real reaction. Are you saying it killed her to hide its identity? Kimberly asked. She was sitting near Antoine but still keeping some distance. Not exactly, Hawk said. It was hiding its shame, Antoine interjected. Newly turned werewolves are ashamed of themselves. That's why they run away from home and usually don't seek help. Hawk nodded. I think she recognized who it was, and they were going through such an emotionally turbulent moment during their transformation that they just strangled her because they didn't want to be seen that way. There was a moment of silence among us. So it is one of us, I said. Antoine looked up at me and asked, does that surprise you? Yes, I said. We shouldn't be transforming so soon, and, frankly, I didn't believe we were actually injected with werewolf saliva to begin with. I had to bring this thought forward. It was a fun plot device, sure, but I couldn't just let go of how dumb of an idea it seemed at first blush. I needed to dig further and see if there was more to it. You thought he was bluffing? Andrew asked. Cursed. You thought he was just trying to motivate us? I threw up my hands. At the time, it's what made the most sense. Gathering experts to hunt werewolves and then turning them into werewolves seems counterproductive. So he's just an idiot, Michael said. He didn't think it through. I looked around at the group, one at a time. We were still on screen, so there was more to be said. No, I said. I'd call Cursed a lot of names, but idiot is not one of them. He's not stupid. Could have fooled me, Michael said. I looked at Hawk. What is a reason you would intentionally infect someone with a werewolf curse? How does that get him closer to his objectives? Hawk looked me in the eye and said, couldn't say. Except I thought he was lying, not because of my moxie or my people skills, but because I felt he was hiding his thoughts for the benefit of the audience, as if he wanted them to know he was hiding something. After a poignant moment of silence, we went off-screen. We were still in the courtyard of the fort where Lila had fallen. There was a sheet covering her now, and it didn't take long for mercenaries to show up to carry away her body. They were acting as NPCs, cleaning up the scene and getting ready for the next one. Shame was our on-screen reason for her getting killed in such a peculiar manner. We needed one. I didn't know what the audience had seen, and I didn't know if Michael was telling the truth, but we were working with what we had. All right. Everyone, where were you during the murder? Ant-Man asked. It was a topic that couldn't be avoided. We had to figure out who the werewolf was, if it was any of us, so that our characters could properly figure it out. I was in the tunnels under the manor, I said quickly because I wanted to explain why I was covered in dirt. I found something big down there. We're going to have to do a scene with it. Like I said earlier, I was listening when the murder happened. I never heard a scream. Now I know why. I might have heard a struggle, but maybe I was imagining it. Your quiet on-set drop only works for things that are on screen, right? Kimberly asked. Yeah, I answered. Maybe the murder wasn't on screen, she said. That would explain why you didn't hear it. Maybe, I said. But I have a hard time believing Carousel wouldn't capture that on film. I doubt it will show the audience who the killer is right as it's happening, but later, it will want to. It was on screen, Michael confirmed. That was that. What exactly did you find down there? Ant-Man asked. I explained my theory that the Withers family might be buried underneath the manor because there was no cemetery on the property. Did you find one? Ant-Man asked. I did, I said. I found Clara's tomb. I didn't disturb anything, but I opened it enough to know that there's nothing in there. Nothing in the tomb? Kimberly asked. Do you mean, like, the coffin itself is empty? There's no body? There's no body, I said. No necklace either. Kimberly seemed really excited to hear that news. That sounds like a really big deal, she said. Were you on screen or off screen when it happened? Off screen from the moment I broke into the room, I said. It couldn't have gotten more than a few seconds of footage of me looking into the crypt with my light. So it's canon? She asked. The crypt is, I said. There's only one real way to find out. And one seemed cold to the idea of looking through the tunnels. Maybe he just didn't want to explore that subplot, I couldn't tell. Okay, he said. Michael was at the scene of the crime. I was in the woods on patrol. Andrew, you were inside the library, right? That's right, Andrew said. Can't really verify that, but I'll have to take your word for now. Kimberly, where were you at the time of the murder? Ant-Man asked. I was at Hetty Morgan's cottage. She was telling me about the legend of Clara Withers. It was mostly stuff we knew. Wonderful, Ant-Man said. How about you, Hawk? Are you going to talk to us? Now that we were off screen, Hawk was silent as a mouse. Hawk just looked at him. It wasn't an angry look. In fact, I could tell there was the smallest part of a smirk on his lips. Still not helping us off screen. At least, he wasn't going to help us out of character. He would still act as an NPC. Ant-Man was trying to think for a moment, and then he asked me, who do you need for your scene in the tunnels? Me, definitely. Kimberly, definitely. Andrew, if only to help play into the whole science versus magic clash. Maybe Hawk. He's a monster hunter, so he might be useful down there, if only for exposition. Antoine nodded. Then, as if to reinforce that he would only act as an NPC, Hawk finally spoke up, careful to speak in character. "I have business up here," he said, staring directly at Antoine. "Take the werewolf-killing wunderkind. You might need an extra gun down there." "I'm more help up here," Antoine said, hesitant. "It'll be a quick scene," I interjected. "Open up the coffin, gasp a little, cough because of the dust. We'll be in and out." Antoine didn't speak for a moment, but then he said, "All right, but make it quick. We've got to regroup, coordinate an offensive." His mind seemed to drift elsewhere. And so, we departed. Michael and Hawk went to work on whatever project they were working on, and the rest of us headed down into the tunnels. As we walked, Kimberly told her story from the night before. Kimberly. "A hole in the ground full of rowdy men is no place for a lady to sleep," Hetty said, handing me a stack of blankets and a pillow. I had already denied her offer to sleep on her couch 3 times, but as I grabbed the blankets from her arms, I knew there was no denying her any longer. She wasn't being polite. She was telling me. "Thank you, Hetty," I said. "You really don't have to let me stay here." "Oh, but I do," she said. "Us ladies gotta stick together. Now, let me go get changed, and then we can have a chat." "I look forward to it," I said. What I really wanted was to borrow her shower, but I didn't say it. If I ever started to look too grungy, NPCs would start coming out of the woodwork to offer me a place to freshen up, even if it made no sense. Women in films were held to a higher standard. As Adeline used to say, you can fight monsters while covered in blood, but you can never have greasy hair. It didn't take long for Hetty to return, this time in a nightgown with her hair let down from the bun she usually kept it in. While I was waiting for her, I let my eyes wander around the cabin. I noticed the old decor. Hetty must have been in her 60s, but even then, she was too young to have some of the knickknacks I saw around her cottage. She was either a collector or an inheritor. I noticed that all the windows had their shutters down. It was nearly the full moon, so it was probably the right decision. I also noticed a humble silver letter opener on the table next to the front door, right next to a shotgun. It was funny to see it among all the frills and patterned china. It felt like I was sitting in Little Red Riding Hood's grandma's house, after the wolf incident. On screen. When she came back, she sat in a large rocking chair while I sat on the couch, where I had laid out the blankets. She stared at me. "Girl, they all look like you," she said. Like I was saying, they all find their way back here, and they don't stay for long. "You're saying there were other women that are drawn to Witherhold Manor?" "Every couple decades," Hetty said. I tried to conceal my excitement, or maybe channel it into nervousness. "Clara Withers, the young woman in the painting up at the manor, it's all about her, right?" I asked. "Can you tell me her story? Her real story?" Hetty smiled. "I'm afraid I wasn't around for the real story," she said. "But I know the rumors. I heard the nursery rhyme growing up." The nursery rhyme had been embroidered on a piece of fabric and then stuck on the back of the painting of Clara Withers. "What did you hear growing up?" I asked. Clara Withers was a sickly young woman. Always holed up in the manor by her mama and daddy. Never allowed to come play with the children of the town or to flirt with the workers at the quarry. "Did you know there was a quarry?" I nodded. "It's been shut down for a long time," I said. "Longer than I've been alive," Hetty confirmed. "See, the rumor was that she and her family were gone on some vacation overseas to the Far East or the deep jungle. No one knew. While she was there, she contracted a terrible curse, a plague to her. In those days, it happened. In these days, it still does," I said. "On occasion, but not like back then. Back then, your baby might get cursed or sick with a disease that mankind doesn't understand. And unless you could find some sort of medicine man or magical cure, that child was as good as dead." Her eyes drifted back into the past. "Well, the werewolf curse isn't deadly," At least, not to the person who has it, I said. What happened to Clara? Well, you see, her parents were rich, so she wasn't some sick little poor girl. No, her parents spent every dime they had trying to make her better. Even brought in magical men and sorcerers from all over, just trying to remove her curse. They say even old Mrs. Withers tried her hand at magic to save her daughter. They say that's why Witherhold Manor is a touch gloomier than the rest of Eastern Carousel. Maybe Mrs. Withers went too far. She stopped talking, waiting for me to understand what she was saying. She killed her daughter, I said. Just rumors, Hetty answered. For years, that young lady wore a silver necklace that was supposed to draw out the curse. They say it did such a good job that when her mama went to perform some dark magic on her, it ended up killing her because there wasn't enough wolf left in her to take the hit. Don't know it's true. That's what they say. I furrowed my brow, tilted my head, and said, the nursery rhyme makes it sound like Clara is still out there, like she's a wolf running around. A lot of confusion out there. That's the she-wolf, you see. Because Clara Withers had a lover. What they didn't know back then was that the werewolf curse could be passed with a kiss, not just a bite. You're saying that the wolf we're after right now is the same one that was turned by Clara Withers herself? Just rumors, all packed together, all swirled around. But I told you, that she-wolf is looking for love. And there's a reason she ain't found it yet. I took a moment to soak it all in. Off screen. I continued my conversation with Hetty, but it never went anywhere. A few times we went back on screen, but there wasn't much more to be learned. A lot of what she said was familiar, but this was the first time we got it all in one place, laid out for us on screen. At the very least, it was the first time I had gotten much of this information. It was my subplot, after all, so I was the one who needed it. Riley had found bits and scraps, and Carousel would choose which one of us would be the one to receive the information in the final cut. I had a feeling it would be me. Chapter 81 Riley tilde. That's a slightly less scandalous version than what I read in the journal, I said after listening to Kimberly's story about Clara Withers. When I had read about it, it was a hush-hush murder situation. But the way Kimberly's story went, it was almost a tragedy of parents willing to do anything to help their daughter, anything other than letting her be a werewolf. Unfortunately, this does nothing to resolve the question of why the werewolf curse seems to have changed in the last 200 years or so, Andrew said. I shrugged. That part might get cut, I said. Andrew nodded. We were off-screen until we got to the stairs, right after Ant-Man said, I'll stand guard out here. If you need help, scream. You're not coming? Kimberly asked. Ant-Man thought for a moment and then said, Look, guys, I just need a break. I was in the woods all night, and I'm not sure I can be at 100% on screen. Do we need to use your nightmare trap? Kimberly asked. We have time. Ant-Man shook his head. I just need a breather. Kimberly acted all concerned and hugged Ant-Man. Andrew looked wary, like for the first time he might have been second-guessing advocating for Ant-Man. Personally, I didn't mind. At least he was finally being open about it. Usually, I was the last one to find out when he was having trouble. We'll be down there. Just gotta walk around in circles for a while, and then I'll show them around the crypt, I said. No big deal. Thanks, Riley, he said, brandishing his gun like he was on guard. I'll make sure nothing comes down after you. For some reason, I didn't feel any safer. Maybe I was more worried about whether Carousel was going to keep the tunnels empty like they had been the night before. After a few steps down the stairs into the basement, we were on screen. What exactly did you see? Kimberly asked, not missing a beat. I swear it was some sort of crypt, I said. A crypt? Kimberly repeated. Like a place where Clara Withers might have found her final resting place? There's only one way to find out, I said. We had picked up flashlights and lamps from the fort. We had much better lighting than I'd had the night before. As I had told Ant-Man, I mostly spent time leading Kimberly and Andrew around in circles just to make sure Carousel got as much footage as it needed. The crypt wasn't too awfully far away. In fact, it was a little too conveniently close. Once I knew the family had been digging down there and had my little connection about there being no cemetery, my high savvy helped beef up my exploration where my low plot armor would have let me down. It also didn't hurt that Lila had been alive back then, and her bad luck magnet gave me a nudge in the right direction, or so I assumed. Eventually, I led them directly to the hole I had crawled through into the crypt. "Have you been inside yet?" Andrew asked. "Of course, I haven't," I lied. "I'm not going in there alone. It's not the dead we need to worry about here," he said. "Right," I said. "It's the werewolves. One of which is lying inside a tomb in there." Of course, I had been in there before and knew that Clara Withers' tomb was empty. Kimberly was the first inside, followed by me and Andrew. Kimberly was very anxious to see what was going to happen. I just wanted to know where the story was going once our characters discovered that the coffin Clara had been buried in, allegedly, was empty. We took some time to get familiar with the area. The crypt looked like something you might have found in your average cemetery, but it had a very low ceiling and everything carved out of the stone of the earth we were standing in. There were dozens of individual cubby holes where different members of the Withers family's coffins were held in eternity. Some of the members had special areas, individual tombs that were a lot like the fancy cemetery houses in New Orleans. What were those things called? Mausoleums. Except, of course, they were underground and covered in cobwebs. Somehow, the spiders had survived down here when nothing else had. I was half expecting a pit of snakes to be next. Ebenezer Withers, Andrew read off one of the inscriptions. "I read about him," I said. "He was a real miser." Andrew looked like he would say something, but he didn't get the chance. "Clara," Kimberly announced, interrupting us. "Here she is." She had found her way right to her, right where I said she would be. It was almost as if she had a magical connection, or at least, that's what it would look like to the audience. The three of us crowded around the tomb built for Clara, shining a light up into the little cranny of the mausoleum where she was kept. "They really loved her," Kimberly said. "Look at her resting place. It's beautiful." It really was. This wasn't carved out of the same stone that everything else was. This was marble, and if I wasn't mistaken, it had silver inlay that made an intricate, beautiful pattern. "So what now?" I asked. "We look for clues," Kimberly said. "There must be something here." "All right," I said, "but we gotta come back here and set this place up with proper lighting so I can get a good shot of this. I wasted a whole reel of film last night just trying to capture something." Kimberly looked around the cramped mausoleum. Andrew and I helped. In the center was the giant slab that served as the lid to her coffin. Around her were little nooks carved into the stone where things like an ivory comb and a teddy bear could be found. "These are all hers," Kimberly said, reaching out for the teddy bear but stopping right before she touched it. She looked almost scared. I didn't know what she was going for there. She was putting on a show, staring at these belongings. I hate to be the one to say it, but from my perspective, there's only one way to find out if Clara is running around as a giant werewolf every night, I said. "You're not serious," Andrew responded. "Unfortunately, I often am," I said. There was a moment of silence as Kimberly continued to look at the various items of Clara's that had been left around, a pair of shoes, a neatly folded dress that was deteriorated to the point of being threads. "Let's open it," Kimberly said. "We need to see." So Andrew and I stood at the head and foot, respectively, as Kimberly got on one side, and we all heaved with all our might. Suddenly, the lid was very hard to move. The night before, it hadn't been easy, but I was able to open it up enough to look inside. Andrew was looking at me like, "How did you open this last night if we can barely move it right now?" But he couldn't say anything because we were on screen. I started to wonder if maybe we should have brought Antwan down to get some proper metal. But finally, the slab budged, and once we got momentum, we were able to move it all the way to the side. Glad to be done with it, I took my flashlight and shined it inside the coffin. And then I jumped back. I barely suppressed a scream. Because while this tomb had been empty the night before, What I was looking at now was the desiccated corpse of a young woman with long blonde hair. I was breathing heavy, and I couldn't help but smile at how Carousel had played the switcheroo. "I guess she isn't running around as a werewolf at night, huh?" I said. The others didn't answer. Their eyes were fixated on the silver necklace that lay against her mummified torso. It was beautiful in a dark way. Andrew started to reach for the necklace. "Don't do that," I said. "Haven't you ever seen a mummy movie?" He looked at me like I was a crazy person. "I'm serious," I said. Then I looked back down at the necklace and reached my hand out, not to grab it, but as if I was feeling something in the air, as if it was letting off some sort of aura. It may well have been letting off an aura, I had no idea. But when you're canonically psychic, you gotta give the audience a show. "More of your grandmother's gift, I assume," Andrew said mockingly. "Just don't touch it," I said, acting freaked out. "There's something dark here." "A dead 19-year-old is pretty dark," Andrew said. But even though he was mocking me, he didn't reach for the necklace again. Kimberly was absolutely enchanted by the necklace, but I assumed that was just an act. For a moment, we were on screen without saying anything, just as Kimberly stared at the deceased young woman. And then we went off screen. Chapter 82 Riley on screen. "And you're telling me for certain that I cannot touch the body?" Andrew asked. "Don't touch the body. Don't touch the necklace. Don't touch anything," I said, trying to sound panicked. "Not with your hands at least." He rolled his eyes. "Well, we're not going to get much of an autopsy done, are we?" he asked. "Just look at her. Can't you tell anything just by looking at her?" I asked. Andrew glanced down at what remained of Clara Withers. We were back on screen almost immediately after we left it because he was technically examining a dead body, which activated as the slap drop. In many ways, it felt like a misfire because he didn't actually have time to examine her properly. My insistence on forbidding him from touching her or her necklace certainly didn't help. The whole thing seemed off, yet we were on screen, and we had to play our parts. Still, he was careful. Using a probe he carried in his pocket, he moved around her hair and clothes, examining them as best he could. He was unimpeachably methodical. She doesn't appear to have been killed by physical trauma. In fact, I would have to conclude that she was fully intact when she was laid to rest. I confess I'm not certain what procedures were done to decedents in those days. She certainly wasn't embalmed. She was killed by a curse. Kimberly said, pacing back and forth. "I told you that." "That is a rumor," Andrew replied. "We have no idea what they might have meant by curse in those days." "A curse, as in magic," I said. "If she wasn't killed by a silver bullet, the only way she could be dead is with magic, right?" "Yes, that's the only conclusion possible," Andrew said sarcastically. "Alternatively, she could have died of a disease. She could have been suffocated or starved. In those days, the real curse was dehydration due to dysentery. I simply have no way of knowing, given her advanced state of decay and the limitations you've placed on me." "Is there anything else?" Kimberly asked Andrew. He shook his head. "It would seem the secrets of her demise died with her," he said. After a little more back and forth, we went off screen. I wasn't sure how much of that Carousel was going to use, but it was good to have established that she did not appear to have died from a silver bullet, though I wasn't sure how we would use it yet. We left the crypt and returned to the fort. As we climbed the stairs into the manor house, Antoine was waiting for us. "Did you get what you were looking for?" he asked. "We got a lot," Kimberly said, and then she went on to explain everything that had happened. At that point, we were pretty much splitting up. Kimberly had to pursue her subplot further, and Antoine needed to work with the mercenaries. Andrew and I, however, were still together, trying to figure out what rolling silver was. "You know, I've been thinking about it," I said as we walked across the overgrown lawn on our way to the fort. "It could be rolling silver because it's really hot, you know, like a rolling boil." "Boiling silver," Andrew repeated. "Silver's boiling point is more than twice as hot as its melting point." "Are we certain that, In those days, your journaler's assistant would have casually been boiling silver? No, I said, but I know who to talk to about it. Carousel must have liked my idea because as we entered the fort courtyard and started walking toward the silversmith's hovel, we went on screen. It was midday by then. The NPC, Hetty Morgan, didn't look us in the eye as we arrived. I think the only person she had actually talked to for more than 10 seconds was Kimberly. After waiting for her to notice us, she finally said, "What do you want?" She did look busy. She was making spikes of some kind, like caltropes, out of silver. "How difficult is it to boil silver?" I asked. "You mean boil, or do you mean melt it?" she asked, not stopping her work. "Those are two different things. Actually boiling it, not just melting it. Up to the boiling point." She shook her head. "I can't do that here. Don't have the fuel, don't have the right rig, don't have any good reason." Well, that was pretty definitive. I wasn't sure if that was just Hetty's personality or if it was us getting the proverbial door slammed in our faces regarding rolling silver. I turned to Andrew. "Well, if it takes a huge rig to be able to boil silver, I'm going to assume that's not what rolling silver is." He scratched his neck. "Perhaps we dismissed Mercury too soon," he said. We turned to walk away, but before we could, Hetty called out to us. "I don't know about boiling silver, but if you want rolling silver, that's a different thing." We looked at each other, then back at her. "You know what rolling silver is?" I asked. Obviously, we had to ask the silversmith eventually, but we had to wait until we had set up the question. I had no doubt that if we'd asked her initially, she might not have known. "Yeah," she said. "Every blacksmith, prospector, doomsday prepper, and even the occasional pyromaniac knows about that." We were getting somewhere. "Can you show us?" Andrew asked. "Sure, I have all the time in the world," she said. She stopped what she was doing, grabbed a handful of silverware from a bin near her workspace, and picked up what looked to me like a rough frying pan with a long handle, though I knew that couldn't be what it was. She pulled up a rig that was essentially a blowtorch connected to a propane tank. "Stand back," she said. She dropped the handful of silverware into the pan, set the torch in a metal rig at an angle, and turned the fuel all the way up. She lit the torch with a small clicking device and adjusted the angle of the flame until it hit the silverware in the pan. Then, with thick gloves, she grabbed the handle of the pan and began to move the pan around slowly. "This old silver here is filled with impurities," she said. "All you gotta do is melt it down. Get it nice and hot." It didn't take long at all. The silverware started to melt, congealing into one glowing mass of metal. Then after it was way hotter than it needed to be for making silver bullets, all at once, I finally saw it, rolling silver. The silver formed into one glob, perfectly round like a ball, and as she moved the pan, it rolled around, hissing and spitting, leaving behind a crust of slag. "You see that?" she asked. "That is what the old-timers used to call rolling silver. It's a handy way of getting the junk out." I looked at Andrew. "Of course," he said. "Silver is a noble metal. It oxidizes at an incredibly high temperature, so if you heat it enough, many impurities react with the air and form slag while the silver itself stays molten." I watched as the impurities were pulled right out of the rolling molten ball. "She's purifying it," I said. The more she worked the silver, the more slag was left behind, until eventually all that remained was a small, round bulb of silver. She turned off the blowtorch and set the pan in front of us so we could see. "There are better ways of doing it if you need a lot of pure silver," she said, "but it'll get the job done." Andrew and I exchanged amazed glances. Normal werewolf hunters would not have needed to heat silver that hot, and they certainly didn't need to purify it, not merely to kill a werewolf. No wonder this was not modern knowledge. "This is great. Now we just need to get the werewolves to stand real still while we fry up some silver," I said. Andrew nodded with a smile. With that, we went off-screen. "We need to continue our experiments," Andrew said. "We need to establish that this is the rolling silver referred to in the journal and understand the effects it has. We could easily bring this rig down into the basement," I suggested. Experimenting on Logan and Avery? Andrew asked. You got a better idea? I asked. He didn't. Will this kill them? Kirst asked as we moved around the table, setting up our experiment near the cages of Logan and Avery. We were back on screen. None of our research indicates it will, Andrew said, but you should know it will be very unpleasant if it's successful. Kirst looked at Logan in his cage. Logan lay on his cot, looking pitiful. More than any time before, Kirst looked like a father worried about his son. Do it, Kirst said. Get results. We are running out of time. That was true within the world of the story. In the meta, we had time, plenty of it. We were nearly halfway through the rebirth phase. No mandatory deaths tonight, thank goodness. We couldn't convince Hetty Morgan to come down to the basement with the werewolves, but I had persuaded her to take the large silver serving spoon with a drop attached I had found. She promised to turn it into a blade for me. That was a bonus. Luckily, once you'd seen it done, rolling silver was easy to replicate, assuming you had the proper equipment and a super high savvy. Andrew had a high savvy, and he also had a trap that boosted his hustle when he was doing meticulous little things like this. He looked almost as adept at rolling silver as Hetty had. Let me say for the record, Andrew said, I really wish we were in an area with better ventilation. That was really something he wanted his character to have said. I guess I could understand it. He was playing a man of science. The change was coming. Logan and Avery could feel it, the full moon. Andrew looked over at me and nodded. We were both wearing safety goggles and large gloves, making Hetty Morgan look really tough compared to us. I quickly opened the gas valve on the propane tank, and Andrew lit the fumes with a striker. Logan and Avery hadn't begun to change yet, but it was clear they could any moment. As soon as the silver got red hot, as hot as the blowtorch could get it, Andrew began shaking it around in the pan, allowing impurities to slough off. Oh boy, did Logan and Avery feel it. It started with obvious discomfort. Then, as I suspect internal changes were taking place, that is when the pain started. It sounded like they were being murdered, like their skin was being pulled off with tweezers. They tried to growl, but it wasn't the deep, guttural growl of a monster. It sounded like a person in terrible pain. When Andrew shook the pan under the heat, the wolves reacted sharply. When he pulled it away and stopped agitating it, they stopped. He did this several times to confirm. They shook and frothed on the ground, but they didn't die. This went on for nearly 4 minutes, with both of them showing pure agony. That's it. Shut it off, Kirst said. He couldn't take it anymore. You know what you need to know. I immediately shut off the gas, and Andrew set down the pan of silver. Logan and Avery didn't begin to transform immediately. Instead, they lay at the bottom of their cells, unconscious. The sun wasn't all the way down yet, just enough to get a reaction out of them. I'd say that's confirmed, I said. Do you have the journal with you? Andrew asked. I'd like to compare our results to those of your journaler. I shook my head. The journal's upstairs in the library. I can go grab it. I really need to understand what reaction is occurring here. Is it the heated silver itself that is causing this? Andrew started to say, but he mostly mumbled to himself. I turned and found the stairs. As I left, I stayed on screen. As I emerged from the basement, the last light of day was waning, and the first full moon of the cycle was taking dominion over the skies. I walked quickly up out of the basement, into the main house, toward the stairs that would take me up to the library. Any luck? A voice called from the entrance of the manor. It was Antoine leaning against a wood beam. It's looking great, I said. I'm glad to hear it. Should you be wandering around by yourself right now? It's almost night. Do you even have a gun? I looked at him for a moment. Of course I do, I said. Never leave home without it. I patted my belt where the holster for my little pea shooter was. Would you like an escort? He asked. I'd rather you fight the wolves than me if that's what you're asking, I said. Ant-Man laughed. Yeah, I figured. Well, come on, I said. I'm going upstairs. I can't wait to show you what we've been doing down in the basement. The effects of this weapon are crazy. It was called Rolling Silver, right? Ant-Man asked. Yep, I said. Once we figured out what it was, it turned out it was the Holy Grail. Maybe I would like to see it, Ant-Man said. First, I gotta go upstairs, I said, and then I started legging it up the stairs to the second floor, all the while still on screen. Ant-Man followed. Chapter 83 Ant-Man Riley was up the stairs so quickly. He was getting away. I had to book it if I wanted to catch up. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, he was already all the way down the hall. He didn't look back, but he called out, "It'll just be a second. I have to grab some books." He was standing in front of a large bookcase, quickly pushing it to the side to reveal the doorway to the library. Had I been there before? I couldn't remember. I couldn't run. Just walk slowly. One foot in front of the other. Just walk slowly. Why was he taking so long? He should come back this way any moment. He'll be back soon, right? I watched him as he stood next to a table inside the little library, stacking book on top of book until the pile was so large he could barely see over it. He lifted it up. I could barely believe it, those noodle arms managing to carry all of those books. "Let me take some of those for you," I said. "Stay calm. Make your voice even. You're perfectly ordinary. You're perfectly ordinary. There are no books in the forest. So, you're not in the forest," I told myself. Riley turned toward me and started walking out of the little library. I could barely suppress a smile. "No, I've got this. I need your hands free to hold the gun, remember?" Riley said. I swayed my head to the side, then back, trying to find his eye line. "Look at me." "Oh. Don't want to forget to close this," he said, turning around in a little swirl while balancing those books. He did a hustle, didn't he? "Look at me." "I got it," he said, struggling to put one pinky against the side of the bookshelf to push it closed. "We don't want any of the mercenaries finding the books. Can't have them learning to read." I laughed at his joke, too loud, too off. He was going to suspect me. "Look at me, you little thing." "There we go," he said. I was almost to him. My teeth itched. He was turning, walking toward me. My smile spread wide. Wider, wider, wider. "Riley is not in the forest." "So, you are not in the forest." He was almost to me. "Just look at me, you little piece of meat." But I couldn't see his eyes. The stack of books in his arms was too high. His head was on the wrong side, watching the ground. If I didn't do something, he was going to pass me. I needed to get him to look at me. Why was he not looking at me? "Hey, Riley," I started to say, but before I could even get the words halfway out, he was talking, louder, talking over me. "We are on the edge of doing something incredible here. We're not just talking about killing werewolves, or hurting werewolves, or hunting werewolves, we're talking about a cure. As silver is purified, it seems to. I don't know. Zap the wolves of their strength and power. I don't know how else to describe it. What if this could prevent someone from succumbing to the curse in the first place? If they never transform, if the curse vector never has a chance to propagate throughout the body, could you imagine? Think of all the victims who don't have to be victims." I was supposed to respond. I had to. "My brother," I said, though I didn't know where it came from. "Exactly," Riley exclaimed, nearly skipping down the hallway, passing right by me without so much as a glance. "We're talking about a world with no more werewolf victims. We could completely eradicate this disease, or curse, rather. And I am going to have it all on film for the world to know what happened." He was walking away. I had to stop him. I was going to lunge, but I couldn't. I could feel something stopping me, something controlling me. I could practically feel the strings attached to my nervous system, to my muscles, even crawling inside of my brain like worms. "Look at me," a voice inside my head screamed. But he didn't look at me. He would soon, though. I huffed, and I puffed, ready to roar and steal his attention away, and then, bam! There was a loud noise. What just happened? A book fell off the top of his stack, landing on the ground with a smack that knocked me out of my senses. "Oh, damn," Riley said. "Can you grab that for me? I'd really appreciate it." His nose was buried in another book, a smaller one. He was walking, reading, and carrying a large stack all at once. I looked down at the book he dropped. It wasn't just a book. There was something spilling out of it. Pictures. Polaroids. Kimberly. There were pictures of Kimberly. I needed to protect her. Someone was after her, right? Someone was obsessed with her. The other girl in the photo. Kimberly. I looked down at them and started to reach out. As I saw my hand, it wasn't my hand anymore. It was covered in hair, and the nails were long and sharp. My arm was so long I could nearly reach the ground while standing. All I had to do was lean over. But where was my prey? I looked down the hallway. Riley was nowhere to be found. Riley. I couldn't kill Riley. He has to protect Kimberly because I can't anymore. I looked around, back the way we had come, then in every direction until I saw a boarded-up window at the end of the hallway. Go. Find. Kill. The voice in my head was so simple, so pure. It was the only thing I had to do in the world. I was about to run downstairs after him, but then a memory came. Rolling Silver. That's where he was going, into the basement where they had a weapon. That was it. I couldn't go near the Rolling Silver. What could I do? I could jump out the window. I didn't know how to walk with my huge arms, but they knew all on their own. As soon as I started moving forward, my nails dug into the wood. I ran as fast as I could. When I came to the stairway, I pushed through it, and instead of turning, I continued running until I got to the window. Barred it up to protect people inside from things like me. With all my might, I jumped through the window, crashing through the ancient glass and boards, and fell onto the ground below. Freedom tastes like wind and moonlight. When I hit the ground, I didn't hesitate. The body that was once Antoine's rolled and sprang up under my control, claws digging into the soft dirt, propelling me forward before I'd even drawn my first full breath of the night. The wind screamed past my ears, a song as wild as the thrum in my chest. The moon hung high, silver and full, whispering its eternal promise. It filled me, fed me. It was mine, and I belonged to it. I ran because I could. The meat inside me screamed. The man, he squirmed, wriggling like a fish on a hook. His voice flitted through my head like an annoying bird. The woods. The woods. Hide there. It's all you deserve. Oh, I would go in the woods when I wanted to. The woods were nothing but dark and quiet. The wind, the scent trails, the promise of prey, they were out here. I had the world at my feet, and I wouldn't waste it hiding like a coward. I let my tongue loll out, tasting the air. Dirt, damp leaves, and then her. She was there, her scent wrapping around me like silk. Sweet. Familiar. Fragile. My claws dug deeper into the ground as I followed it, bounding faster, harder. She was near. Kimberly, the man said inside me, his voice weak and desperate. Not prey. Not prey? Of course she isn't prey. She is my love. The scent of her was fire and heat, lighting every nerve in my body. Her heartbeat called to me, and I wanted to sink my teeth into it. Not to destroy, no, not entirely, but to claim, to know she was mine, that I was hers. My muscles tightened with the thought, and I surged forward. The gravel under my paws bit back, sharp and unkind, but I loved it. Pain was life. It meant I was alive. I snarled at the lights ahead, where the scent led. Closer. She was so close. The man screamed louder now, clawing at me from inside, his thoughts like gnats in my ears. Turn. Turn to the trees. Go back where you belong. Don't hurt her. The trees would be mine soon. The fields were mine now. I could run fast and forever in the fields. I growled, shaking my head to shut him up. His fear, his weak little urges, they didn't matter. I was strong. I was free. The moon sang louder now, urging me forward. Find her. And then, pain. White hot and blinding. I yelped, stumbling as the agony shot up my leg. My paw felt wrong, searing, screaming. I lifted it, seeing the glint of silver. A spike pierced deep into my flesh, and I swore I could see smoke curling where it touched. I growled low and deep, biting at the wound, but the silver bit back harder. It was poison, it was fire, it was wrong. Before I could pull free, the ground snapped beneath me. A trap. The rope came alive, wrapping tight around my leg. I roared, thrashing, but the trap was faster, smarter. It yanked me up, snapping my body up like a crackle in a fire. The air rushed past as I was flung skyward, the earth spinning away. The monster hunter. He saw me before I saw myself, while I was still a pup in the heart of a man. I knew it. I dangled, suspended, the moon mocking me with its cold light. I twisted, snapping at the rope, but it held firm. My claws swiped the air, useless, rage bubbling inside me. I roared again, louder, trying to drown out the man's laughter inside my head. "Got you?" someone whispered in the darkness, smug and pathetic. Where was he? I would eat his heart. No. This wasn't over. I would find her. She was near. I would be free again. I snarled at the moon, at the stars, at the whole cursed world that dared try to stop me. I would not stay caught. Off-screen. Now, I couldn't free myself. I didn't know why, but I stopped struggling. "How did you know it was him?" a voice asked. Her voice. Kimberly. She was here. She was here. Everything I ever needed was in her voice. I could hear her. I could smell her scent riding the wind, cutting through the poison and the pain. "Just a hunch," said another voice. Male. Gruff. Hawk. "I just want to know how the kid knew." "Nice to finally hear you talk," a third voice chimed in. Riley. My prey. He sounded so close, but the world spun and spun, twisting me in the rope. I couldn't place him. I snapped my jaws at the air, trying to catch his scent. "I guess you couldn't just tell us who it was," Riley said. No answer from Hawk. Ha! That made me laugh, deep, growling laughter that came from my chest, shaking the rope. I knew it was him because it fit the story, werewolves feeding off trauma and all. Also, the guns, Riley said. The guns? What was he talking about? The spinning disoriented me. My ears twitched at every word, every movement. Where was he? I couldn't see him, but I could hear every sound, every shift of weight, every inhale. The guns? Hawk asked. He has a drop that makes it so his allies get comforted when he brandishes a weapon, Riley said. When he pulled his gun at the fort after Lila was killed and then again in the manor, I felt nothing. That meant I wasn't his ally anymore. Huh? Hawk grunted. There was silence then. I flexed, twisting my body to reach the rope. My claws scraped against it, but it held firm. Strong, too strong. What was it made of? It didn't matter. I would find a way. I always found a way. I found a way out of this meat, didn't I? Do we have to kill him? Kimberly asked. My Kimberly. She wanted me alive. My heart thumped hard, but the sound was muffled by the blood pounding in my ears. I had to find her. To see her. To have her. Nope, Hawk said, casual. Why not? Another voice asked. The soldier. The one who smelled of sweat and oil. Curse didn't infect all of us just as a plot device, Riley said, smug. He always sounded smug. No at all. I told you guys he had to have a plan. He wanted one of us to turn because a baby wolf eventually runs home to the pack leader if she is nearby. Oh, Kimberly said. We're going to track him. We have to say that on screen, right? Set it up? They were close now. I could hear them moving, boots on gravel, soft and cautious. I twisted again, hard this time, the rope creaking under my weight. I gnashed my teeth at them, snarling, daring them to come closer. They would never catch me. I was not some coonhound to be tamed. The tall one, Hawk, held out his gun, steady and sure. I growled at him. The biting silver. I couldn't fight him, not with that weapon in his hands. "So is he lost?" Kimberly asked, her voice softer, hesitant. "Can't we do the thing you talked about earlier, Riley?" "I don't know what will happen," Riley said. "Let's try it," Kimberly begged. Hawk sighed. The sound grated against me, dismissive and cold. He shifted his gun, pulling out another one, thinner, strange. Not the biting silver. He pointed it at me. No. No. Something struck me in the shoulder. I jerked, roaring, snapping at the spot where it pierced my fur. Ow. What was this? Not the burning pain of silver. Something else. Something soft. Slow. Heavy. I blinked, the moon blurring above me. My limbs felt weak. My growls faded, my jaws hanging slack. The spinning stopped, but so did the fight. I was so tired. So tired. The world dimmed, the rope creaking softly above me. It was a dart. "Antoine," a beautiful voice called to me, cutting through the haze. "Antoine, wake up. You're having a nightmare. A nightmare. This is all. This is all a dream. The wolf is just a dream. Thank God." I opened my eyes. Kimberly stood beside me, her face soft with concern. She was upside down. I was hanging from a rope. It was not a nightmare. The wolf. It was gone. Sleeping. No, fighting. Always fighting. On screen. I growled, the sound rumbling deep and angry in my chest. I tried to speak, to warn her. Get back. Get away from me. But my mouth wasn't built for words anymore, only fangs and rage. I thrashed, desperate to free myself, and my paw struck her. No. She stumbled back, clutching her shoulder. Blood. I smelled it before I saw it. My stomach turned. I roared again, but it wasn't anger this time, it was an apology, raw and guttural. But how could I tell her? I can't speak. I can't fix this. My eyes darted to the rope. I needed to get down. My claws scraped at the knot, and I slipped one sharp edge into the twisted fibers. The rope was no match for me. I could loosen the knot. I yanked my leg free, my back paw tearing through the loop. I hit the ground hard, the impact shaking the earth beneath me. Pain shot through my legs, but I was already moving, already standing. My muscles coiled, tense, ready for a fight. "Don't shoot him," Kimberly cried. Her voice stopped me cold. She was hurt. She's hurt because of me. Carousel picked me to be the wolf because of my problem. Because I couldn't control it. Her shoulder glistened red in the moonlight. The sight of it made the wolf stir, whispering promises in the back of my mind. Claim her. Make her one of us. Free her. No, I growled, low and broken. It was just a growl. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a command. It was a denial, simple and final. I was not a wolf. That was just a nightmare. I stared at her, at Kimberly, at everything I could never touch or protect again. It felt like goodbye. It was goodbye. My claws dug into the ground as I turned, my body trembling with the effort, and I bolted. I ran. Faster than I ever had before, faster than the wolf ever had. The forest called to me. Its shadows wrapped around me like a blanket, pulling me deeper. Away from them. Away from her. Away from everything I could break. There was no fort. No libraries. No Riley. No Kimberly. Not in the forest. There were only trees. Endless, silent trees. I was in the forest. I always had been. Tope continued. Thanks for listening.